Hey guys, I'm Matt Pittman of Meat Church. I'm here today to show you how to make a brisket on your Traeger. So I'm very Central Texas inspired, and so that's really the method I'm going to show you guys today. What we're starting out with here is a full packer brisket. A brisket is comprised of two muscles. You've got the flat and you've got the point. So basically they overlap each other like this, not right on top of each other, but a little bit offset. So the first thing we want to do is we want to trim this brisket. We're probably going to take about 2 pounds out of it. And so when you look at a brisket, look on the meat side here, there's some really hard fat right here at the top. We want to go ahead and take that off to start. No hard fat's going to render in your cook, so I'm going to eliminate that at first. There's a lot of personal preference in a brisket, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of effectively shave this out. But I'm just making a nice cut, not digging deep into the meat, just to kind of remove this fat portion here. The next thing I want to do is this old kind of gray meat on the side, I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to do probably about 1/4 inch just around the edge just to trim this up to get rid of all that. Okay, so that's nice and cleaned up on the side. So now let's look at the top. So you can decide how much of this other fat you want to take off here. This soft fat will render, so for cooking in your backyard, you don't necessarily have to remove it. Any of the stuff that's really loose, I'll pick up and kind of fillet it away. But where it's a little thicker here, I'll go ahead and take that off. So on the fat side, if you look at this entire brisket, what you'll see is it looks like there's fat covering the entire side back here. And so what you'd like to do is kind of take that down to about 1/4 inch, maybe 1/2 inch at the absolute most. It's personal preference. So effectively you want to shave that off. I think that's pretty good for my standards. And then one more piece. So this side here is just a little bit thick. So in between the flat and the point, there's quite a bit of fat in here. I want to take that out so that I can season it. So I'm going to take my sharp knife again, and I'm basically going to just cut kind of one big section of this off. Kind of cut it out just a hair, and then I'm going to take the whole thing off because there's just so much fat. Okay, so this is looking really nice and trimmed, and now it's time to season it. So there's a lot of ways you can season your brisket. Central Texas barbecue is coarse cracked pepper and big kosher salt, 50-50 mixture. A lot of guys add a little bit more to it, so that's where I like to bring in my holy cow rub, which is heavy salt and pepper and a little bit of garlic, touch of paprika. And so I'm primarily going to season just with this rub. And I'm gonna start on the meat side, and I like to season pretty high. So if you're seasoning up high, then you're gonna get a nice even application. Now I don't use any binders on my protein before I apply seasoning. So what's a binder? A binder could be an olive oil. Some people use things like mustard, Worcestershire sauce. I can apply the seasoning and just kind of pat it a couple times and I'll be good to go. So in my mind, no real need to do anything else. I also want to make sure I get the sides. Okay, so that's a pretty healthy application. What I like to do is layer a little bit. So I'm going to bring in my Holy Gospel rub, which is a rub that is primarily Holy Cow, but it has a little bit of our Gospel all-purpose added. And so I'm going to go light with this. So I went pretty average with the first one. This was just going to be a nice coating across the top, not too much. And I'm going to pat that in. So ideally, we would let this sit 20, 30 minutes max, and we're going to flip it over and repeat the process. Okay, so this brisket sweat out for about 30 minutes. So if you look at it, it's nice and kind of appears wet on the top. And like I said, that's where the seasoning has pulled some kind of moisture out. Basically, that means this rub has completely adhered to the brisket and we're ready to cook it. But let's talk about cooking this. We're gonna cook at 275 fat up, and it's basically gonna be a 2-part cook. We're gonna cook this thing probably about 6 hours or so unwrapped in the grill, and then we're gonna wrap it and we're gonna finish the cook. So, and we're gonna talk about this as we cook it, but what you're gonna be looking for is an internal temperature, and that's gonna be your cue to wrap it. That bark is gonna start to form, it's gonna look really pretty. And so what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your instant read thermometer and you're going to check right in the middle of the flat. You're gonna poke in and check, and what I want you to do is wrap it around 165 degrees internal temperature. So let's take this thing outside. All right, so here we are at the Traeger. We've got it set at 275 degrees. And like I said, I like to cook fat up. So I'm gonna place this baby on this way. All right, so we've been rocking at 275 degrees. Let's take a look. And so what you see here is this beautiful mahogany color. I'm gonna go ahead and test it with my instant read thermometer right in the middle of the flat. So we're in the 160 degree range, 160-ish, getting to 165. So I'm ready to pull this thing off and wrap it. All right, we're coming back inside off the Traeger. It's time to wrap this brisket. There's several ways you can wrap your brisket. If this is your first brisket, I'd recommend wrapping in heavy-duty aluminum foil. I'd pull out 2 arm-length pieces on top of each other, put the brisket on top, wrap it up nice and tight, go back in the Traeger. That's the most forgiving way to cook. I'm gonna go the Texas route, which is to wrap in unwaxed pink butcher paper. So the pro of this is all that great bark you created, it's permeable through this paper, so you won't actually lose that bark. There's a little bit of a learning curve with butcher paper, so like I said, I'd start with foil first. Gonna take the brisket here, this beautiful mahogany brisket. I'm gonna put it right in the middle. I've got 2 pieces of paper just kind of overlap. So think swaddling a baby, basically, however you wanna do it. And for me, I'm gonna go back in fat side up. And you know, from here, when we go back out on the Traeger, what we're looking for is just to get it again probe tender right here in the middle of the flat. So it's probably around 202, 203 degrees. And it's gonna be okay to check it throughout the cook right through this paper. You don't have to unwrap it or anything like that. Just check right here and you're gonna be good to go. So let's go put this back on the Traeger, staying at 275, taking it home. All right, got this baby wrapped, fat up, right back in the Traeger, 275 degrees. Not gonna touch it. Gonna come back in here and check it in about an hour and a half right here. And when I get in the 190s, I'm gonna check it about every 10, 15 minutes or so till we get to where we're probe tender and we're done. All right, so we're gonna probe this brisket, and like I said, we wanna check it in the flat. You can see where I've checked it a couple of times. I'm okay going back in the same hole, and it feels really tender right now. So I'm feeling good about this. It's time really to pull this thing off, and we wanna let it rest. Super important to let your brisket rest for at least an hour. You've been hitting this brisket with high heat for 10 hours or so, and all the moisture in this brisket is kind of out at the end of the muscle fibers, and you want to let that thing relax so that moisture redistributes throughout the entire brisket. You don't want to slice this thing hot. This thing, if you slice it and it's steaming out, that's just robbing yourself of a really juicy bite you could have. So important to rest it an hour, but you could rest this thing up to 3-4 hours and it'd be fantastic. Just put it in the cooler and lock it down. So we're done. Okay, so we brought the brisket in, wrapped, left it wrapped, put it in a cooler, and it sat there for just over an hour. Now we've pulled it out, and it's time to slice this. And I want to show you this thing fat up. I told you how this was going to render. Look how soft this is. This is going to be an amazing bite, and it's just tender as can be, I can tell just from the touch. So I want to talk to you a little bit about slicing. Common mistake I see people make is they take their knife and they just start slicing straight down this brisket. So the first thing that we'll do when a whole brisket comes out is basically cut it in 1/3. So we'll go about 1/3 of the brisket down, and we'll just make a nice pretty cut here. You can see on the flat that it's a little more lean. You can see all the fat here in the point. I don't like it when people squeeze their brisket, but just to show you what you can achieve on the Traeger, I'm gonna squeeze it for you anyway, just a little bit. Don't wanna squeeze that too much. That's, again, you're gonna rob yourself of a super juicy bite squeezing that, but sure is sexy to look at, so there you go. So now, I'm gonna slice this 2 different directions. Here on the leaner side, or on the flat, we can go ahead and just slice right down the brisket. So I'm just gonna slice a few slices here, this direction. And for those of you that like the fattier stuff, which this is my favorite part of the brisket, you're actually going to spin this because the grain goes a different direction. So, and I'm gonna slice mine actually thicker. So I'm going almost even 1/2 inch on this end, opposite direction on the slices. And I want to show you, look at that gorgeous smoke ring that we got off the Traeger. So oak pellets help with the heavy smoke. The Holy Cow Rub, the Holy Gospel just give you that gorgeous smoke ring we've got right there. So here's kind of the difference. So you can choose if you like the lean or if you like the fatty. Pull this apart, talk to you about that perfect fat there, not too much. Fat is flavor when used in moderation, and that is a perfect amount to me, and I can't wait any longer, so. Ain't mad about it. That, my friends, is a Texas brisket. So I hope you guys enjoy. For this recipe and others, hit TraegerGrills.com/recipes or download the app.